Going into this project, I knew Dragon Age Inquisition was going to be the biggest hurdle, and if I could just get past that, everything would be fine. Inquisition is arguably the longest Dragon Age game, and it's a game padded with hours and hours of open world busy work. And where there's open world busy work, there's a slow level curve to coerce you into actually doing it. So in doing a project where I talk about the big picture version of the story, all of that grinding was going to seriously wear on my patience. But I knew if I made it past Inquisition, it was going to be smooth sailing, because Veilguard is a mission-based Kingdom Hearts style action game, which is more my jam than homemade preserves. Anyway, after Dragon Age 2 ended up being controversial and sparking a wave of reactionary harassment campaigns that would cascade into retake Mass Effect and later Gamergate like a set of misogynistic dominoes, BioWare got frightened and decided to head back to the drawing board with Inquisition. Now, granted, this wasn't entirely Dragon Age 2's fault. The game was meant to be a side story and not a direct sequel, but after the Old Republic was delayed, EA rushed it out the door so they'd have something to release that quarter. So they had about 8 to 9 months to develop the game and get it out the door, leading to a lot of corners being cut and assets being recycled. Honestly, it's a miracle it turned out as well as it did, and people did start to appreciate it after the shrieking gamer brats started obsessing over the false claims of Zoe Quinn's abusive ex. However, even before Inquisition was a glint in Gator's eye, the game was already starting at a disadvantage. First of all, the development team was so demoralized after the cold reception to Dragon Age 2, and so they were second-guessing everything they did. Furthermore, because of the intense harassment and threats to her family, Jennifer Hepler ended up leaving the company, and her work on Dragon Age 2 was what made Marion such a strong character and made her motivations around protecting her sister so compelling. Sure, Dragon Age 2 has been vindicated by history, but the problem is that it doesn't really matter if a game is appreciated later if its entire existence as a current-gen game is flooded with gamers being morons. So a lot of the really interesting aspects of Dragon Age 2 were walked back for Inquisition, namely the idea of having a single cohesive character. As you know, I find humans to be utterly dull in fantasy games, but Marion was at least an interesting character as she existed outside of the privilege of human nobility. Having an apostate father and an apostate sister meant she was often creating friction with oppressive power structures of Thedas, and none of them were really on her side, hence why she actually makes a decent connection with the Dalish of all people. It also means that the story is tailor-made for that protagonist, and everything from the decisions and storylines to Dragon Age's new personality system was made with Hawke in mind. But this time, you're back in the seat of having to play a single protagonist, but who can have multiple different backgrounds that affect the way they view the story. And while that sounds like a good thing in theory, the law of averages means that you can't possibly have all the variations and reactivity such a thing would require. No game is ever truly 100% reactive, and the games that claim they are big fat liars. See, one of the reasons Origin's plot is about the Darkspawn and the Blight, despite both being a footnote in the lore of Thedas, is because in addition to the 4 interesting origins of the Dalish Hunter, Mage, Dwarf Commoner, and Dwarf Noble, and the Goddess of Vengeance that is the City Elf, you could also choose to play as a Human Noble if you're the kind of person who eats dry toast and room temperature water for every meal. And the Human Noble is so utterly divorced from every other origin. The Dwarves get to deal with the nightmarish political situation in Orzammar, as well as the ever-present issue of the Darkspawn. The Mage is directly connected to the Mage-Templar conflict. The Dalish gives context on elf-human relations, and the City Elf puts you right in the middle of Thedas' racism and gives you a gun. But the Human Noble is completely divorced from all of that. It's arguably the most squeaky clean bad guy plot of mean old Arl Howe killed your family and you're the only survivor and now you're out for vengeance. Even worse, Howe does the same thing to the alienage after Callian leaves, so the City Elf gets the Human Noble origin as an aside later in the game. The Darkspawn plot is pretty much the only string to the Human Noble's bow. They don't really have any perspective that makes for interesting role-playing because they're utterly deafened by privilege. As much as Origins can be a missed opportunity, role-playing a bitter City Elf now empowered to exact pain on her oppressors is actually quite amusing and makes some of the more tortured contrivances fun to completely disregard.
The crimes committed against Zathrian's children were grave, but they were committed centuries ago by those who are long dead.
I've no more fucks to give, my fucks have runneth dry. I've tried to go fuck shopping, but there's no fucks left to buy. I've no more fucks to give, though more fucks I've tried to get. I'm over my fuck budget and I'm now in fucking debt.
And what the fuck are you supposed to do as a Human Noble? Get shot by the Dalish for being racist? Perpetuate the delusion that nobility has some divine right to rule? Get stabbed by Shiani the moment you show your Shem ass at the alienage? How about the only place a Human Noble works is the Landsmeet, where you can marry into the royal family, but Inquisition has the same problem. For every interesting character you can play, you can also choose to play a human, which fundamentally makes the story considerably less interesting. See, after the end of the second game, all the mage circles rebelled. Good for them. The Templars left the Chantry and became independent to fight a war against the Mage Rebellion rebellion. Then the Chantry brought their leaders together to try and discuss the possibility of peace, as the war is starting to hurt the people of Ferelden. Then the meeting explodes. The explosion tears a massive hole in the Fade, causing demons to start pouring out and attacking, and thus does Dragon Age Inquisition begin. Honestly thought we'd get at least an hour in before the distractions happened. Anyway, as we start up with the Mage-Templar conflict, the plot is overtaken by the Fade breaking open, and the player character has a special mark on their hand that lets them close tears in the Fade to banish the demons. How nice of the Fade to make sure it leaves us a spare key. Now you've been deputized the leader of the Inquisition, an army created by the Chantry, who was then denounced right after the death of the Pope. And now you're left to build it back up to fight the demons and close the breach. It turns out this is all the machinations of Corypheus, a Tevinter Magister who's gone all Darkspawn. Corypheus was last seen in the Legacy DLC of Dragon Age 2, when BioWare realizes they needed to set up a boring, simple antagonist for the sequel, and all they had was systemic bigotry, and they'd already penciled Human Noble in as a player character, so they couldn't make that the villain. Corypheus has unleashed a new Blight, a new Archdemon, and an army of demons in order to... Actually, what the fuck do you want, Corypheus? I may have forgotten that part. Whatever he wants, you accidentally ruined his plans by being the one to get the spare keys to the Fade instead of him, and now it's a race against time to save the world before he can blow it up. Along the way, you can interact to some degree with the Mage-Templar conflict, as the Templars went rogue from the Chantry, so either of them can be recruited into the Inquisition, while the other is recruited by Corypheus. But honestly, the focus of this particular game is on faith. See, the Inquisitor isn't just someone with a magical set of breach keys. Lavellin's involvement is so important to stopping the breach, and her ability to do that happens to be by such sheer coincidence that people start to believe that the Inquisitor is the Herald of Andraste, whose presence was the work of divine intervention by the Maker himself, and you, the player, are encouraged at all avenues to go along with this. This, incidentally, is why playing as a human is just the worst idea in the world. A human herald is not only welcomed, but would likely embrace such a title, as most humans are Andrastian. This utterly defangs most of the tension of the title of Herald as just another special person title. Conversely, playing as an elf is restricted only to the Dalish, as the City Elves are also predominantly Andrastian. A Dalish Inquisitor being named the Herald gets them branded as blasphemy by the Chantry, and creates a very interesting pull with someone who follows the Dalish religions being heralded as the prophet of a completely different religion entirely. Now, one thing Dragon Age has always done really well is religion. Fantasy franchises of all shapes and sizes can't wait to start mapping out the cosmos and every single god that is provably real and an active player in the story shenanigans, because a lot of them were Greek mythology nerds. The problem is that it puts the scale of action so high above the point of view characters that it's hard to really care about it, and because there was still a player character involved, things become weird. Warcraft is probably my favorite example. Warcraft has an entire cosmic map of different cosmic forces and the literally titanic beings who control them, and all of them fall like dominoes at the hands of the Champion of Azeroth, who, and I quote, eats monsters like the jailer for breakfast. The Champion is one walking existential crisis because entire religions have their gods either slain or utterly humiliated by the Champion's actions. Take Elune, for instance. You, the Champion, slaughter her favorite children just because a hot older woman told you to. Then, later, when she laments that her children were claimed by Hell, you've actually already freed most of them from Hell by that point. It's your morning chores. How the hell does anyone still believe in Elune when she has been so completely made a fool of by an upbeat sociopath with mommy issues? This is like if God himself lost a bet with Charles Manson. Dragon Age, meanwhile, has to this day never confirmed the existence of the Maker. In fact, there's strong evidence that the Maker is completely fictitious and his supposed acts of divine work were actually done by Lyrium. So without the direct hand of the Maker being involved, anything fortunate ends up being attributed to the Maker and Andraste. And the Inquisition is spawned by the Chantry. Everyone involved is a fanatical Andrastian, and so readily believes that Lavellin is some herald of their god. The game makes a point about how faith can give people courage and the drive to keep going in bleak circumstances, but as is often the case with Dragon Age, the story overlooks the actual reality of the organizations it writes. There is a fine line between inspiring the faithful and exploiting the fanatical, and positioning yourself as a divine figure goes right over to exploiting the fanatical. That's what cult leaders do. The thing is, this happens regardless of your origin. So sure, a human character raised to follow the Andrastian religion would probably see this as divine service, but if you're playing an elf, the proper way to play a fantasy game, she ends up being roped into all of this against her will and pushed to go along with being a herald by the Chantry people all around her. What about if you're playing as a dwarf or Kunari, Lily?
What about it?
The characters that are most in your circle are Cassandra, a Chantry Seeker, Leliana, a Chantry Sister from the previous game, and Cullen, a Templar. All of them are big simps for the Maker and so push the idea of faith as a uniting force. But amidst their words is the reality that, denounced or not, you are making the Chantry more powerful with each action you take. Now when it comes to faith, I've never been particularly kind. I'm the kind of atheist who's actually read religious texts and come to the conclusion that Yahweh is a deranged sociopath who fucks with people's lives for yucks. But you know, I say that here. I wouldn't go into a church or a synagogue or a mosque and say that. I keep that shit to my own spaces. So the idea of impersonating a religious figure skeeves me the fuck out. The idea of manipulating people who have been indoctrinated by an organization as cruel and unforgiving as the Chantry skeeves me the fuck out. And the player is only really able to offer token objections to it and to tell the occasional major character, no, I'm not a herald, you fucking idiot. Surprising absolutely nobody, it turns out the special demon-colored demon magic that opens and closes rifts to the demon realm and can summon and banish demons at will did not in fact come from God. Who could have fucking guessed that? It was actually a demon artifact that Corypheus was going to use for... Actually, what the fuck do you want to do, Corypheus? But can you tell everyone this? No? You could tell a few people, but if you suggest telling everyone the truth, other characters just say, let them keep believing you're a divine figure. That's cult behavior, Marion, that's evil. I can't see Lavellin going along with this shit willingly. Now, Callian, she absolutely would. She would tell those idiots Shem, yes, I'm the herald of your god, throw yourselves upon the demons like a wave crashing against a mountain. All of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am eager to make. It's another instance where you just aren't able to engage with the interesting part of the game. You're shunted into being a cult leader and are not allowed a say or opinion on that, because it's another thing the series doesn't really think too much about and doesn't let you think about either. The same thing happens with the Grey Wardens. They're so utterly fanatical and duty-bound toward preserving the Blight that they're made absolute rubes by Corypheus, who sends his minions to say, hey, do blood magic and summon an army of demons. It'll totally stop the Blight permanently, I swear. Where the fuck is Callian where all of this is going on? Actually, wait, no, scratch that. Plotting to kill and destabilize human kingdoms by unleashing unholy terror upon their unsuspecting civilians is exactly something Callian would do. The Grey Wardens are so easily convinced to kill themselves just because it might stop the Blight. Now, this has always been their thing. In the first video, I had someone suggest that it never occurred to them to use the reality of systemic bigotry to side against the werewolves because they always saw the Grey Wardens as bringers of peace and unity, an inherently good figure. No, they are not. The Grey Wardens will recruit knights, templars, apostates, criminals, serial killers, blood mages, necromancers, Tevinter magisters, and pretty much anything that will fight a darkspawn. Callian is conscripted into the Grey Wardens for killing the fantasy equivalent of 25 cops and Eric Trump. Sure, that's a good deed for the land, but not something that an organization declaring itself a bringer of peace would go along with. The Grey Wardens have no principles outside of Darkspawn must die. They are utterly and completely without a moral compass. Now, I've always found there's something interesting about characters who have no principles of their own, who mold their principles onto whoever is giving them a treat in that moment and could end up on both ends of a class war, depending on who happens to be in their immediate vicinity. And that's exactly what the Grey Wardens are. They are utterly without ethics and fixated so completely on a single goal that they can be easily duped into anything if you tell them it will kill the Darkspawn slightly faster. They're the ones who murdered the Pope and started the plot in the first place. They're like a guard dog. They bark loudly but are easily pacified by a burglar coming in with begging strips. But again, it's something the game presents to you but never really does anything beyond, do you want to recruit the Grey Wardens or not? Do you want to execute this one warden or not? There isn't really time to sit down and examine what the wardens are and what they actually do with their authority because they just aren't very well characterized and the plot is on an urgency timer. The Grey Wardens heralding a demon invasion because they're that fixated on ending the Blight could serve as the plot for an entire game, but here it's thrown into 2 missions as an aside. It's the same problem that Origins had. At every moment there's an interesting thing to think about and discuss, and the game hurriedly shoos you away from it because it would rather you focus on demons and the Fade, as if those things are in any way interesting. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. Inquisition does do something quite new, and that's the Winter Palace. It's a 2-hour-long mission where you have to balance between schmoozing with nobles and hunting for blackmail on the Orlesian nobility to play a game of political backstabbing. It even has a new resource of court approval, which you need to both sacrifice to search the estate more and keep high to get the best ending. See, at the start of the game, you're taken to a bad future where the Orlesian Empress was assassinated, and that started the downfall of Thetis. So, with the Temporal Prime Directive thoroughly violated, you conspire to prevent the assassination instead by revealing the traitors in the Empress's court. Except in true Dragon Age fashion, it ends up going, well, I mean, for the sake of player choice, we could just, let the Empress get assassinated and back one of the usurpers, because it turns out the real mastermind was everyone. A duchess, a duke, and an ambassador are all plotting their own coups, with only the Duchess being the one serving as the main villain. And in the end, you can decide which between the Duke, Ambassador, and Empress you want to support, and it's one of those Obsidian-style moral choices where each choice is deliberately horrible. Empress Celine and Duke Gascard are both horrible racists. Gascard has been writing books about how elves are more akin to animals than humans, and Celine's backstory involved purging an elven alienage after they became too inconvenient. Oh, so you picked Brialla then, Lily, the elf rebel sympathizer? Well, no. You can't actually install Brialla as Empress because well, elf. You can only make her the mastermind behind either Gasgard or Selene, and she's fucking Selene. She's fucking someone who massacred her people, who she claims to be a fervent supporter of. Well, isn't this a lovely group of absolute bastards? Hey Briala, you should join my party. I have a mage who thinks the Mage Rebellion is selfish, and an elf who hates anyone who embraces elf culture. You could all have a self-loathing party together right in front of this conveniently placed cannon. Oftentimes these kinds of everyone sucks here choices are meant to paralyze the player, make them seriously stop and think about their actions rather than picking the obviously good option, but I'm not that kind of player. Decisions in a game need to be more interesting than just which of these groups of people do you want to hurt slightly less. And when I'm presented with those choices, I tend to just take whichever one is less effort to take. So I ended up saving Selene and letting her rule alone, because to reconcile Selene and Briala, you have to pick dialogue options in a certain order, and I got the order wrong. And at that point, it had been 2 hours and I was getting completely exhausted with wandering around this fucking palace, talking to dukes and duchesses, while the radar function refused to actually work half the time. I had certainly liked the quest at the start, and though the whole subterfuge and a nobility party was interesting, having to placate the nobles to keep my approval high while I rifled through their stuff, but then it went on too long and involved too many variables and I was getting exhausted with it, which is kind of a microcosm of the series as a whole now that I think about it. But that whole here's your goal, oops I've spilled kudzu all over it aspect of this quest only gets worse. So you know how Origins set up a pretty cut and dry system of humans are oppressing elves, it's pretty bad, and humans are putting mages in death camps, it's pretty bad. Remember how Dragon Age 2 spent most of its runtime trying to argue the Templars have a point? Well, you are not gonna believe what happens in Inquisition. So this game really hates elves. You only get 2 elven companions whose entire shtick is, I'm not like other elves. Solus has a dim view of elves in general, believing that city elves and slaves allow themselves to be oppressed, and compares the Dalish to animals. He's an ancient elf and views the ancient elves as a wholly different level of being to the elves of today. Turns out at the end of the game that he's actually one of the elven gods who trapped every other elven god in the Fade and cut the elves off from their magic, leading to their destruction. And Sarah is an assimilationist who sneers at any elf who dares speak their own language, engages with their own culture, or do anything elfy.
I've never heard that phrase. Can anyone translate?
I'll try. Can you talk like us?
She likes to consider herself as a fighter for the common folk, and believes the things against the common folk are the nobility, elves who act too elfy, and mages. So the rich and 2 oppressed minorities. You could be a debate streamer with such a whitewashed perception of the common folk. These aren't things that automatically make a character bad, but what does make them bad is you never get to make any real points against what they say. The Inquisitor is kind of a doormat in this game and can only ever offer weak rebuttals to the claims of their companions, hence why you don't get to engage with the implications of being named the Herald. They're always talking at you, and you can't really respond, especially to Sarah, though that might just be because nobody can understand what the fuck she's saying.
Then you've got cloaks and spy kings, like this tit. Or was he one of the little knives, all serious with his little knife? All those secrets, and what gave him up? Some houseboy who don't know shite.
I can't understand a word she says. She's all noise and ignorance.
To think that this is a character who complains about the elven language not meaning anything. The ability to actually engage with the character's noxious personality is important. If I could dare make another comparison to the Old Republic, there's a character in that game that I absolutely loathe, but who was one of the best characters BioWare ever made, Koth of Vortenna. Koth shows up on the Outlanders escaping from Zakul 5 years after the death of Emperor Valkorion, and Koth himself is a big simp for Valkorion.
The Emperor's a great man. If anyone can help you take down Arkan, it's him.
If you knew what I do about him, you'd run. The man killed billions.
He was always good as a cool.
Koth's main goal isn't really stability for the galaxy, but peace for Zakul from Arkan's reign of terror. As a result, he often expects the Outlander and Lana to go far out of their way to save Zakulian citizens from the actions of their own leader. And if you don't, he eventually betrays you. What I love about this is that it's not just Koth lecturing the player for doing a bad and hating them for it. The hatred is completely fucking mutual.
We're the last people Koth would ask for help.
Maybe he finally came around?
Answer the call. I want to hear him grovel.
Valen and Scorpio boarded the ship. They captured my crew and took the bridge.
You let our best weapon against the Eternal Fleet fall to Valen?
Excuse me for not shaking hands.
I can reach you from here.
The problem with these kind of characters is often if you like them, then great. but if you don't, you have to kind of just put up with them or find a way to feed them to a gibberling. Few games let you express that dislike in a way that makes the character's objectionable qualities part of the fun of having them around. With Koth, you get to fully control the kind of relationship you have with this son of a bitch, and because of that, I love his presence in the game. It's like the developers were aware of the fact that Koth's personality is divisive, and so let players who don't like him have some admittedly funny dialogue with him.
You ever heard of a quantum bomb?
Oh, Koth, you didn't.
Anyone who doesn't enter that hidden passcode starts a countdown. Everything for thousands of kilometers around us. Boom.
Every time you open your mouth, I gain one more reason to end you.
You can't do that with characters like Sarah. You can actually kick Sarah specifically out of the Inquisition, but aside from that, you can't even really comment on what a self-loathing shitstain she is. And what that tells me is that the writers genuinely thought this character was universally lovable and had a perspective worth listening to. And so the very idea of clashing with her wasn't even considered. Now, you can clash with her a little, tokenly.
So your main takeaway is that elves worshipped demons?
Well, they never call them that, yeah? But that's what it had to be. I mean, it was impressive and all. Makes the Dalish look like tits for living in the woods, but so what? There can't be a bunch of gods and the Maker. Don't matter how much or little you believe, those don't fit. So call me stupid, but I believe the stuff not made up by dead people who failed. Mythal is a ruin full of demons. I mean, it just makes sense, right?
That's the legacy of our people you're insulting.
And?
And I'm Dalish and might take exception.
But at no point does Sarah really have to confront these things about herself. I'm told she has some kind of development if you romance her, but no, she doesn't. In fact, if you romance her as a Dalish elf, she ends up giving you an ultimatum to admit the elven gods are all demons, or you have to break up.
You'd really end our relationship over what I think of some ruins.
Maybe I don't believe much or understand it, but some people think too much and can bend anything to fit anything. Some things just don't fit. Yes, you can explain it, and no, I won't get it. But I don't care. Some things don't fit. So take it back. Just say you'd rather look ahead. That's all.
I'm sorry, Sarah, but I believe this is important for our fellow elves.
And say the other bit.
What?
You'd get it if you were smarter. If you understood what it meant to be elven. Take your elves. I'm just people.
Yeah, I'm sure Lavellen would definitely sign up to have an abusive relationship with someone who hates her entire culture. This is just unpleasant, and not even in a challenging, thought-provoking, higher purpose way. You probably met someone like Sarah before, and the truth is there's nothing you can do for her. This is something she has to sort out on her own. She clearly has a lot of self-loathing, which she projects onto her race. There's this perception among people both in-universe and out that the Dalish are hyper-exclusionary, and so Sarah, having been raised in the cities, likely would not be welcome among the Dalish at all. The franchise has often gone back and forth on this, and little time is spent inside Dalish clans, but for what it's worth, in the vast majority of instances, the Dalish are actually quite welcoming to city elves looking to join their clans. In the first game, the city elf is welcome among the Dalish and treated as a friend by default, albeit with a little wariness because they're so armed and surrounded by Shem. In the second game, you actually help a half-elf escape to a Dalish clan who welcome him with open arms, and in Veilguard, an elven veil jumper Rook is said to have joined a Dalish clan. So by and large, that perception isn't true outside of some lore tidbits which don't matter in the face of the real story. So Sarah's issue with quote-unquote elfy elves isn't even based on anything in fact. It's pure delusion. She hates herself, she is an elf, and therefore she hates elves. And the story itself ends up digging through elven ruins that are studied by Morrigan more than the Dalish, passing by them and their history with nary a thought, destroying a few more pieces of elven history because, well, we gotta stop the breach. The ruins of a civilization decimated by human imperialism is just another stop on the tour. Their god's just another spell to use in the final boss, and to then be unceremoniously killed after the credits. All of it laid in ruins at the feet of the Chantry. Even worse, Inquisition rubs a little more shit in the eyes of the elves by presenting their old kingdom as having already collapsed before the Tevinters even got there. Why does this happen? Why are not only elves treated like worse than garbage in these games, but their ancient kingdom is retconned into some corrupt Tevinter on bath salts? Well, the reason is Tolkien. Tolkien established the elves as objectively better than humans. They're stronger, they're faster, they're smarter, they live longer, their magic is more powerful, and their steel is unbreakable. The age of men didn't come around until the elves got bored and left. And some fantasy fans have a weird bug up their ass about this, leading to an attempt to subvert this by making elves either evil, incompetent, killed by hubris, subjugated, or arm candy for human men. Or if you're Warcraft, all 5. Warcraft even has its own version of Sarah, Valyra Sanguinar, a blood elf who forsakes her own people, already small in number, to act as the lapdog of the Rin family. She's a character who often claims, "I'm neutral, my loyalties are my own," but she does whatever the Alliance leaders tell her to. She's in denial about her own subservience. All of it is steeped in this very juvenile power fantasy where humans are the dominant race in damn near every fantasy world. Thedas, Faerun, Azeroth, wherever Magic the Gathering is set, in all of them, humans are the most populous, the most dominant, they can be the most classes, and they have no downside in terms of racial bonuses. And they also tend to take inspiration from the British Empire. Dragon Age gets a little spicy by adding France and Italy, but if one of these games based their human kingdom off, say, the Ottoman Empire, the gamers would blow a fucking gasket. Because the players are human, and they want to make themselves. This is why some people seriously suggested the human noble had a worthwhile perspective, because they are human. And a lot of people don't go into these games looking to explore the perspective of a character who is simultaneously sculpted by them but given agency by the game. They want to play themselves. They want to imagine themselves as the unlikely hero of the land. So you can't not have humans everywhere and unfettered by cultural limitations. Hell, humans in fantasy games aren't even allowed to have a culture at all. And that's the only reason there's been this weird backlash against Tolkien-style elves, because somewhere, some sweaty nerd was incensed at the idea that a fictional, pointy-eared, effeminate man thought he was just better than him. Even with real-life encounters, some people are just utterly paranoid that someone else is judging them. Which is what makes it all the sweeter that Dragon Age is at its most interesting when playing elves. The perspective of a city elf is what gives Origin's otherwise dull both sides conflicts anything interesting to do. Aw, did your grandpappy do it bad and now you have to live with a curse? Aw, I missed the part where that's my fucking problem, bitch. The perspective of a Dalish elf really puts into context how utterly cultish and weird the Chantry is, essentially pushing you to embrace an unwanted religious title by a religion you don't even go to, all to give some people the vague idea of hope, as if they can't have faith in themselves.
Your faith has blinded you. There can be no chosen one. Only we can save ourselves.
There's a conversation with Sarah where she claims that the elven gods have to just be demons, because apparently we can't have them and the Maker. The Andrastian religion is a monotheist religion. There's no room for other gods to exist, because the entire purpose of it is to say there is only one god. But Mithil is real. Fenharel is real. Elgernarn is real. Gillinane is real. These are all characters you spend a lot of time either interacting with or slaying. Every single archdemon ever slain is an old god corrupted by blight. The fact that all the elven gods exist is proven, and the Maker is conspicuous in their absence. Their only claim to divine power is the Urn of Sacred Ashes, and if you bring Oghren with you to find it, he says he can sense the mountain is filled with lyrium. It's lyrium that has those healing powers, not the Maker. And the Chantry is given so much unchecked power. The power to imprison mages, the power to organize an army of lyrium-addicted fascists, the power to organize the Inquisition itself, and you're encouraged at all avenues to impersonate the Maker's prophet to weaponize the Chantry's power. At the end of the Trespasser DLC, Llewellyn is left with a choice: to disband the Inquisition after it has served its purpose and had become so powerful it had ears in every nation, or to hand control of one of the most powerful political and military forces in the world to the Chantry. Yeah, I chose to disband the Inquisition because absolutely nothing good could ever come from handing that kind of power over to the Chantry, although the game certainly doesn't care to recognize that fact. There's a recurring problem with Dragon Age in that it sets up a world with a lot of interesting things to explore, but only lets you explore the most boring and cliched parts of it. And in doing so, the story never gets to progress. In Origins, you're raising an army to fight an evil dragon. In Inquisition, you're raising an army to fight an evil dragon and a mage. And in Veilguard, you're raising an army to fight an evil mage and 2 dragons. You can't keep raising the stakes like this. You can't keep going, and then a bigger world-ending threat was waiting just around the corner. These stakes can't keep rising in perpetuity because it seems no matter how many innocent people these guys murder, Thedas never seems to run out of cannon fodder or people who can smack down gods with their bare fists. We're still nowhere close to the unappreciated majesty of Dragon Age 2, giving you a front row seat to what the Templars do to families by watching them rip yours apart. It was so impactful that in playing Inquisition, I did everything I could to make sure Hawk made it out alive because I knew if I didn't, Bethany would never forgive me. But now we're just back to cosmic invasions that are so important they push everything else aside. The potential to disband the Circle of Mages or establish a Dalish clan as part of the governing body of his entire city-state relegated to an ending card or a mission table objective. There's no time to make this bleak, miserable world a better place. Its very existence is constantly under threat, and it will be again and again and again. Dragon Age needs, above all else, to shit or get off the pot. It can't keep doing this in perpetuity, setting up a story with heavy heavy socio-political elements and then throwing them aside in favor of, and then the armies of hell attacked again. Either just eject all the bigotry and political intrigue and focus on being a shonen anime for D&D nerds, or find whichever writer keeps writing and then another dragon attacked and give him some yarn to play with. The fundamental problem is that Dragon Age isn't about anything, even though it pretends to be. A game with a specific theme in mind has to narrow its focus. Mass Effect doesn't give you a whole lot of freedom in your decisions, just the ones immediately within Shepard's orbit, because its theme would have been severely negatively impacted by letting you have too much freedom. The only time you can wipe out an entire clan of people is in the third game, and that's only by failing to talk them down from wiping out themselves. But the morality system used in Mass Effect falls down a very clear by the book or by any means necessary approach to stopping the Reapers. Dragon Age has to account for an environment where you can come from a Dalish clan, support the Dalish clan, or exterminate the Dalish clan. The variance with which it approaches its bigger story elements means a consistent theme is difficult to maintain because the game always gives you the option to disregard the theme and be a complete psychopath for good or ill. Later games with more direction do put more restrictions on player characterization. Player choice always rubs up against keeping a story tonally consistent and manageable, which was why Baldur's Gate 3 was really open in the first act and then narrowly railroaded you after that point. Any game that has advertised itself with total freedom has always ended up being a liar, because such a thing is impossible, and letting the player be an evil psychotic bastard is likely going to be going against whatever story the creators wanted to tell, which is why in most games you just can't. And I don't really consider this a problem. I like having the ability to make decisions in an RPG, but I prefer those decisions to be in service to different viewpoints toward a game's theme. Dragon Age 2 does this, and it does it by placing you in the middle of one very specific issue and making you play a specific character with previous attachments and motivations, and whose personalities follow the same logical through line. But Inquisition goes back to simply giving you too many variables the game can't account for, and sacrificing whatever theme might have been in the game on the altar of player freedom. And I don't know why this continues to be a thing in a game with constant changing protagonists. The Inquisitor is not the hero of Ferelden. Never has been. Personally, I think the Inquisitor should have always been a Dalish elf. No human, dwarf, or Kunari options at all. Given the story ultimately concludes with elven ruins, relics, and gods, and multiple characters have discussions about elven culture and history, and the aspect of the Chantry being outraged at an elf being labeled the Herald van Draste, the Dalish would have been an ideal choice similar to exclusively playing human for Hawke. But the story suffers because of the player desire to do whatever they want and make whatever choices they want, and Dragon Age is really the only series from BioWare that lets them do that. Even Baldur's Gate, regardless of the kind of character you create, establishes several hard and fast rules about your character. You were adopted by Gorion, you were raised in Candlekeep, your best friend is Imoen, and you were raised to be the best version of yourself possible. And while you can go against that idea, curse Gorion's name, treat Imoen badly, and succumb to Baal's influence, the game is not shy about how half-hearted that is, and the game becomes unplayable if you're too evil. Mass Effect doesn't really have good and evil. Shepard is effectively the same character with different levels of pragmatism on each end of the Paragon Renegade scale, going between Dirty Harry and Captain Janeway. The Old Republic's light side, dark side system has unique pulls for all 8 class stories, interpreting different ideas of what light side and dark side mean in each situation. Dragon Age has nothing of the sort. There's no thematic cohesion between the choices you're allowed to make because the story is trying its damnedest to accommodate 4 to 8 backgrounds for a character into one single story. The franchise has had to choose many times between player choice and a cohesive story, and each time it has tried to avoid making that choice. This can't continue. Anyway, I'm Lily, and I'll see you next time.
God, you are so cool. Although sometimes it's like, what's the deal? You never answer your cell phone, and your messages are often ambiguous.